Wednesday night. Against the Stream, Buddhist Meditation Center. My name is Jason Murphy. And I teach here sometimes. I've been going through is there anyone new in the room or anyone new on the Zoom that wants to introduce themselves? Okay. Well, welcome anyway. I've been going through a bit of I've been taking my time going through the story of the Buddha. And then there's been like the very end of last session, there was some discussion about kind of renunciation. I've been working through this story, this archetypal story that is the Buddha's story. And the kind of archetypal sequence is that there is a calling. And, all the like Jason and the Argonauts and like all these like classic movies have these. And I think even still today, there's the calling, there's a departure, there is some struggle. There is some struggle, could have many different meanings. There is an awakening or some kind of insight or understanding, and then there's some return. There's a return. And I've been kind of going through, kind of taking it apart. Really, I've just been talking and then getting some feedback, and we've just been moving through it kind of slow, which is really good, I think. I view the Dharma and I view the teachings of the Buddha like very similar to, you guys ever seen those Russian dolls where there's like, they're made out of wood and they're like hand painted, and there's one big Russian doll, and then you take that one out, and then there's two, and then there's four, and then there's six, and they just kind of get smaller and smaller and smaller, more there's just more understanding of more detail, and so we're moving through this story. And I've also been teaching a class on developmental trauma, and so that also inspired some just discussion around how the Buddha experienced trauma in vitro. And definitely shortly after the birth, separation and abandonment, his mother dying, and how, I am just kind of creating these kind of links between, so what happens in these kind of existential crises that I think a lot of us are called to practice around, called to wanting to understand about life and death and suffering. And, we all have a calling, some kind of calling that brings us to practice. And then at some point, there hopefully is some kind of a departure from, definitely departure from what was known, what we were doing, whatever it was we were doing before, and into some new desire, some new way of wanting to understand or disentangle perhaps the mind. And so this calling, this departure, and then, as for anyone who's been on a meditation retreat or meditated for any period of time, there's some struggles that we are gonna face. And there's, the normal struggles of life, right? Old age, sickness, death. That which, we love will be removed from us. Some of the karmic kind of momentum that is based on our actions and our ethical integrity that will be things that we're going to have to confront at some point. And so this is kind of the struggle component. and how I feel like it can apply to us, right, as individuals. So I'm going to kind of pick it up from there, from the struggle to the awakening, and then we'll see where we land. And there was some questions, not only last week at the very end, there was a question about renunciation, full renunciation, kind of asceticism. And there was some other questions kind of about, drugs and alcohol and addiction and stuff like that. So I think I'll focus a little bit on that as well, kind of from the Buddhist frame or the Buddhist perspective. So the other thing I was thinking about is just not really giving a lot of instructions today and just sitting. I've been kind of lighter on the instruction, and I've actually gotten some feedback that people really prefer that, or some people really prefer. And what I noticed that happens is people who have, and this was true for me when I was first learning how to meditate, I really valued the instruction. When I first learned how to meditate, I had very little instruction, but some. And then when I really started to get serious, I was actually in a Zen practice and there was no instruction, but my mind would just revert back to the early instructions, which were, simple Vipassana, breath, mindfulness of breathing practices. And then, as I started to kind of get involved more with Vipassana, meaning insight meditation practice, or Theravada and kind of Buddhist practice, which is primarily what we do here. I really valued the kind of intricacy and the kind of understanding and complexity of the instructions and the practice and the kind of understanding of the process that unfolds, because it does have a known and predictable course. And so I appreciated that, and still do very much appreciate it. But as I started to deepen in my own practice, I started to recognize that I needed less instruction, because I kind of knew what I was doing, and I could just kind of go with the flow of experience, and had some self-direction. I had built up a instruction in my mind, which are the same instructions that I offer. So that being said, I want to just give a little bit like a front loading instructions, and then we're going to just sit for 30 minutes. So the major instruction is that you really, like, as long as you're bringing effort to what's happening, whatever happens is just fine. The general kind of present time experience invitation is to find something that is present time, that is here. And there's kind of 3 suggestions given, right? Body sensations, breath, and the kind of rising and falling somewhere located within the body or connected to the body, and then or sound. Now, these 3 things are constantly changing, right? The body is constantly changing. The sensations are constantly changing. The sound is constantly arising and passing away, and the breath is constantly changing. So it's not a fixed point that we're actually observing. It is the arising and passing away of experience, but we're just limiting it to one or opening it to all 3 at first. After some time, the tendency and the tendency for people is to really emphasize the mind, right? The thinking, we close our eyes or we, ring a bell, and then the mind just kind of gets loud and big, right? Like, oh, this is what's happening. Sometimes I call it the freeway of the mind. It's like being on the 405 at 5 o'clock, right? There's a lot going on. And the goal isn't to get off the freeway, but to either be okay, not getting sucked into what's happening, or to try to recognize that, okay, the freeway of thought is happening, but I don't have to get on the freeway. I don't have to get stuck in the traffic. I can, take the off ramp and just kind of chill, wait, let it go. This is where kind of grounding in breath or body or sound can be really helpful. So just kind of working with that, okay, recognizing, the attention, sometimes they call it the train of thought is maybe a better description than the freeway of the mind. The train of thought is that, we're kind of standing on a platform and we're watching a train go by, subway station or whatever. We're watching the trains go by, and then we're not worried about whether the train has arrived yet or whether it's left yet, or what cab or what kind of train compartment we're kind of going to go into. We're just on the platform, just on the breath or body or sound, and observing the train coming, going, stopping, people getting off, people getting on, all of the busyness that can happen in the mind. But by de-emphasizing that or not worrying so much about it, something I think very palatable can take place where we begin to kind of calm. The mind begins to kind of get more interested in what we are actually focusing attention onto. So I guess that's enough. So that's kind of what we're going to do. You can choose that kind of resting on the platform if you'd like. Sometimes people envision themselves kind of sitting like on the bank of a river, and there's a flow, the river that's flowing, the flow of thought. Anything like that works. We're not getting too much into the visualization of it, but just recognizing, oh, did I fall into the river, or did I jump on a train? And if so, getting off at the next stop, or getting out of the river and settling back. So that's the invitation. Any questions before I ring a bell? Okay, good. All right, so finding a posture that is workable, that is sustainable, where you can be relaxed and alert. All right. Well, it's 30 minutes silent meditation. Any questions or reflections?
Jumped on some strange trains for a while. And there's other times where it's just like, I feel like an Eastwood movie was just tumbleweeds,
Uh-huh.
no trains to be seen.
Yeah. And what happened, Frank, when you were aware that you were on a train?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of focus on that point where all of a sudden you kind of come back.
Mm-hmm.
Probably like a body sensation, maybe would kind of bring me back
Mm-hmm.
a little bit. And then yeah, I just focus on that.
Mm-hmm.
Sense doors kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Come back into it.
Yeah. So what he was saying, it's recognizing, at some point you recognize, oh yeah, I'm lost in thought. And, several things can happen. It's like it's like a multiple kind of opportunity, right? We can, almost always, as soon as that recognition is there, we're already less in the story, whatever the story, we've already recognized we're on the train. But it could be it's a pleasant train. It could be it's a fantasy, or it's something that feels good and there's some draw to want to continue. Could be that we just recognize, oh wow, I've just been kind of lost in the cacophony of thoughts and ideas, one usually feeding to another, what the Buddha called papancha. Papancha basically means kind of a thought stream. So it's like one thought leading to another thought, leading to another thought, that's kind of pulling you farther and farther out. And maybe related, but maybe not even related to whatever the original kind of distraction was, the original kind of thought that entered in. But the papancha is, it's also kind of described as like rumination. So when we recognize, what happens for people? I'm sure Frank wasn't the only one. Found himself on some strange trains. What? I'm going to Jersey. Even the use of the train analogy can be super helpful as we're kind of deepening our practice, because we can begin to see, like I remember doing this, I've kind of utilized this several times where it's just kind of naturally come up, this idea of trains of thought, but they're actually they have labels. Like we can label the train. Oh, that was the train of self-doubt. Oh, that was the train of becoming. Oh, that was the train of, career, or that, and we can begin to kind of recognize, oh, okay, there's these, and then maybe there's themes, to lead us onto these trains. So we can begin to kind of pull it back a little bit if we can stay curious. Oftentimes what happens is, people experience judgment. They judge themselves, or some criticism, some kind of critical view comes in and says, oh, you're doing what you shouldn't be doing, but that's not really it at all. The mind is just doing what the mind does. And the concentration isn't quite strong enough, or there's more sleepiness, or there's more mental agitation that will arise and pass away, and moments of concentration will arise. So, in a full 30 minutes without any prompting, without any, then you really get to see like, okay, how is my mindfulness? How is my concentration without any prompts or guidance? But there can be, if we can meet that moment where we recognize, and I like to use that word recognize and kind of switch it around to recognize. We are kind of recognizing, oh, this is what's happening here. Like kind of coming, it just allows us to go kind of top down. Oh, I'm maybe lost in some, whatever it is, any of those trains, right? Self-doubt or anxiety or future or worry. We can label the train and then get off. And then you're back on the platform, back in that presence of, and I think the way you described it, Frank, usually, there's some physical, I find that too, like when I found myself lost in a kind of fantasy or train of thought, future, past, whatever, if I can, once there's some awareness, thinking, or papancha. Sometimes I use the word papancha because I like that word. It's kind of it's not critical. It's just like, oh yeah, the mind, doing its thing. And then tune into some physical sensation, which can bring, just naturally brings us back. So great. I mean, that's a good practice. It can happen 100 times, Yeah. Any other thoughts, questions, reflections in regards to what that was like?
Well,
Yeah.
for myself, like that, I've been exercising a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and I look like I better have been, and like a lot of like dips and pull-ups and stuff. So like my body's like super tight right now,
Mm-hmm.
and like observing all of you, how still most of you were. I'm like, my stillness, it's like hit or miss. Like I don't think I could actually eventually sit still for 30 minutes
Mm-hmm.
solid. But it was really challenging. It was weird, like usually, like your feet will fall asleep,
Mm-hmm.
And from like the yoga sutras that I've like read, and like essentially like when you sit like that, you're basically like squeezing all the blood out of your legs, and it's then pumping into your spine. And eventually, as you get like really disciplined with your stillness, like your legs don't even fall asleep anymore. Like you might see like pictures of the Buddha or statues, like his feet are completely facing the sky, and like, so I'm just like, what was your name again? I'm so sorry. Jason, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I told you last week I was impressed by your stillness. How do you stay so still?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it just comes with practice, and there was this story that came up not that long ago about the Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Chah is a Thai meditation master that is basically the kind of, you could call it the patriarch of the style of meditation that Noah and I are both trained in, this Thai forest tradition. And early on in his practice, he had a lot of fear and a lot of agitation when he would sit in meditation. And it was primarily about death. And so he decided, I don't know if he was instructed by one of his teachers, or he decided to sit in the charnel grounds. So go to the cemetery, go to the, kind of the charnel grounds is kind of where they cremate the bodies, and sit there. And he did. and then, and this was, you know, in the forest and in northern Thailand, and you know, and as you might imagine, there was a lot of stirring that happened. There was, you know, he thought he was hearing footsteps, and he thought there were ghosts that were around him, and you know, he had all of these fears that started to kind of come up, and the way he describes it is that he vowed to not open his eyes, and if it was the end of his life, if he was going to get, you know, eaten by a tiger, or, you know, whatever fantastical fear, that he just wouldn't move, which is also in the Buddhist story, when he takes what's called the final seat. So the idea here is that you're absorbing into the concentration of stillness. And I do move. We do move. I mean, I'm not a statue. You're not statues, you know, just unless you were staring at me the whole time, right?
Yeah.
Which I didn't think you were. I'm just kind of saying, like, you know, because what I notice is, like, if I start to get a little sleepy or whatever, like I'll start to slump, and then I just do a slight adjustment, and then that's, you know, and the feet are asleep and they're tingling, and they're just asleep. No big deal. You know,
But that doesn't make you move like slightly, like.
no, and that's just because I have conditioned myself
Okay.
to not. It's like when the nose itches, don't scratch it.
Yeah.
And over time of building the resolve, and this is why I was telling the story about Ajahn Chah. He built the resolve to not open his eyes, no matter how terrified he was, no matter if it meant he would die, he would get eaten by a tiger. That was kind of one of his worst fears, or some ghoul or zombie, or, you know, whatever the story was that came up in his mind, or snakes. And, you know, there's all these different, you know, and it is, I mean, I was meditating once in the forest in northern Thailand, and I thought I saw a really nice place to sit under a tree, and I found out that I was sitting on a mound of fire ants, and then they, you know, slowly started to crawl and bite all over my legs, and, you know, I got up. I didn't stay there, you know, that. So, you know, you have to have some level of discernment, right? But but then also there was times where, you know, and there still is times where there's pain in the body, and can you be with that? Can you be with the discomfort? Can you be with the agitation in the mind? Can you be with the physical discomfort? And this is, you know, what in Buddhism they call virya. Virya means effort, wise effort, right? Or energy, like you're kind of applying that resolve, that focus. And over time, you realize, okay, you're not going to die. You know, your foot isn't going to fall off. The blood will return. You know, partially has to do with posture, partially has to do with flexibility, practice. You know, this is why yoga and meditation, you know, go hand in hand, you know. But the resolve that the Buddha made to himself of taking the final seat is, you know, he had been practicing, and I think I left off. Well, before I get into that, Mike, do you have your hand up? So I wanted to let you share if you'd like, and then I'll get into the story there.
I'll be quick.
Take as much time as you need.
Thanks, Jason. It's just the idea of what you brought in, being on the platform, the train platform, and watching the trains go by, that kind of resonated with me. And like, I grew up in a part of Dorchester, Boston, called Savin Hill, and where I first lived, the trains would always go by the back of my house, and then we would walk up to this train station, and then, you know, got into all that when I was in the meditation. but I think, like you said, recognizing that, and then having, I think, the gentle acceptance just to kind of draw back to the platform again. And then like you'd mentioned earlier, like alternating anchors, like body scan to breath. And I feel like when I alternate to the body scan, like going from head to toe or going back up, or even bringing in the point to point meditation that you've used in the past,
Uh-huh.
other way to kind of, just stay in the present moment as much as I could. And you mentioned tipping and stuff like that. I did that a couple of times, and this would recognize it and gently, move back upright. So all in all, it was a pleasant sit, and I think it really resonated, that whole platform, watching the trains go by. I thought that was a good reflection. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for sharing that. Another kind of visualization. So I do like the trains of thought. And that's why it's kind of a foundational, actually, first taught by Stephen Levine, Noah's dad, in 1971. So that's the year I was born. And that's also the Gradual Awakening is the first meditation book that I ever read. Well, I mean, I read Siddhartha, but that's not really a meditation book by Hermann Hesse. It's just kind of a fantastical story that involves some of those elements. But that's actually really about the ego and the death of the ego. But but anyway, so that train of thought can be useful as a kind of okay, I can visualize this, and I can just kind of associate that with what's happening in our experience. And another one that was given to me by Gil Fronsdale, who was another very gifted teacher that I had studied with for many years, and that was the kind of resting on the shore, and it's kind of like on the shore of a lake. And then there's boats that come, and you're just seeing the boats, and the boats are thoughts, and there might be different. There's like a party boat, and there's like a booze boat, and there's like a fisherman boat, and there's a water skier boat. Like there's all different kinds of themes that might be playing, and they might come pretty close to the shore, and maybe even invite you on, right? And sometimes you'll get on the boat, and you'll go off and be in some fantasy or some, whatever it is, lust or agitation or regret or remorse or, whatever the themes are. And then when you recognize, then you just come back to shore. And that was, that's also something that I've kind of brought up in my meditation practice. To not get too, this is like, it's like, painting a bit of a picture can be helpful than just, I'm just seeing thoughts. To give it some imaginative context. Which brings me back to the final seat, right? So the Buddha had been practicing, and he was doing, so just to kind of recap for those of you who are fairly new. So the calling, the Buddha to be Siddhartha Gautama was a prince, and he was in line to be a king. And he rejected at some point. He had some calling, and I think it had something to do, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some call, he was kind of met with these existential questions. What happens when we die? Old age, sickness, death, these kind of, how come there's so much suffering in this world? And he was really, kind of compelled to find these answers. And so he, kind of rejected or renounced his kind of in line for the throne, which made by the way, his cousins super happy, because his cousins were really more the greed, wanted power, this whole thing. And then and that comes in later when his cousins kind of try to kill him and to defame him and do all these, and the Buddha he wasn't well liked by a lot of people, actually, because he was so rebellious, because he was so nonconformist and anti-establishment. But what happens is that, there was this other piece that I wanted to kind of talk about, that, the extremes. So he went from the extremes of, what you could call hedonism, where really his father really wanted him to enjoy the palace life, so he had concubines, he had servants, he had anything he wanted, he could do whatever he wanted, he had tutors that he, would kind of challenge his mind. He, did kind of with his cousins and stuff, he did kind of roughhouse play and, martial arts and sword and bow and arrow and, vaulting on horses and all this, he was like super active in that way, all the way up to like his kind of, early 20s. And then he, there was that level of dissatisfaction that happened. And somebody asked me recently, did the Buddha do drugs? Did the Buddha drink and get high? And my instinctual answer is yes. Yes, he drank wine. Yes, he smoked hashish. In this kind of hedonistic time, he could do whatever he wanted. And then, he had gotten married. He still had, all the pleasures of being a prince, right? So he had a child, and then he still, there were still just levels of dissatisfaction where he saw that none of that really led to peace and ease. None of that really led to happiness. So then he went to the other extreme. He gave it all up. He renounced the palace. He renounced the jewelry, the jewels, the money. He renounced his position. So in the caste system, he was kind of, high class or upper class. He renounced that, meaning gave it up, meaning kind of left it behind, and went to the other extreme of asceticism, which kind of started with kind of meditation and living in a monastery, or an ashram, and doing, yoga and, eating. They have, different, depending on the kind of tradition, they have different kinds of diets, studying kind of Ayurvedic kind of medicine. So he kind of did these kind of things first and still didn't find relief. He found some deep concentrative states that in what are called jhanas, which are deep concentrated samadhi, which is one-pointedness, concentration, and some deeply peaceful states that were blissful. And while he was in that deep concentrative state, he was all good and transformed. And then he would come out of that meditative state and nothing else had changed, right? It was kind of, the mind would return to, being afflicted with greed, hatred, and delusion, basically, and irritability and frustration and, desire and craving. And so he recognized that wasn't good enough. He wanted more. He wanted more understanding around old age, sickness, and death, and attachment, craving, because he was able to see, even before he reached the awakening experience, he was able to see that there was this craving that would return when he would come out of these deeply meditative, concentrated states, that would kind of transform him or transport him out of his, contextual mind, and he would get very concentrated on one point, right? Like a mantra or a body scan, or even the, tip of the nose kind of meditation, or doing something like metta phrases or something like that. It can all lead to very deep levels of samadhi. And as many people that have, and I've dabbled with it, I mean, I've done some of it, but it was, later, I mean, so the Buddha to be, Siddhartha basically kind of was like, yeah, okay, so that was super awesome, but it wasn't enough. Like he wanted more. He could tell he still didn't have the answers that he wanted, that he was longing for, that he knew were out there. So then he went to the extreme of doing, yoga and, eating very, very little and, living in the forest. And, he grew his fingernails and he grew his hair out and he grew his beard out and he didn't shower and he just wasn't interested in any kind of beautification. He would wear the rags off dead bodies. There's a type of monasticism that's all they're allowed to wear is what's that?
They're called the Agoris.
Yeah. So there's anyway, so he went to this farthest extreme, right? And then he still, he had almost died, and then he began, and he had been practicing with 5 other ascetics, and they kind of they hung together because they were all sharing the same goal of wanting to find, release from craving, basically, and release from attachment to the body is one of the ways that he felt he would, and they all felt that they would find the release from craving. So, but he almost died because he was starving himself. He was so resolved that he almost died, and then he recognized that this isn't the way. Similar to the deep levels of concentration. By the way, I had mentioned this before, but the deep levels of concentration, there was one particular teacher that was very gracious and kind, and was like, yeah, you've reached these levels of samadhi, these deep levels of jhana, right? Concentration that you can teach. Come be with me. We'll be equals, And he was like, even though that's very appealing, and that's very kind of you, that's not, there's more I have to do here. So he graciously kind of declined. And then later he met a yoga instructor or a yoga teacher, guru, that was actually was very covetous, maybe a lot of kind of concentration and a lot of discipline and a lot of resolve, but also was very greedy around his position. He was attached to the existence of being a guru, right? And this absolutely happens with teachers in the present time, for sure. We hear about it all the time. People that have done some levels of study have these big egos and attachment to being a guru, right? It's a thing. So anyway, that's an example of what happened then. And then so he started to take a little bit more food, and his 5 friends that were sitting with him as his ascetic friends kind of shunned him. They were like, oh, like, you're indulging. You're so, in indulgence of, eating like once a day. Like, what does the matter with you? You're clearly not on the path. And he, took that criticism and said, okay, well, just like there was some deep resolve that he had, that he knew that this wasn't the way. And so he started to drink the rice milk, and there was a woman that he went off on his own. There was a woman who would come and get and offer, as does in Asia and in India, offering ascetics, some kind of what are called the requisites, right? So shelter, clothing, food. That's about it. And so it started to feed him. So he started to gain some energy and some vitality, and then he was able to apply concentrated effort again. And so he took the final seat. And this was a deep resolve where he had said, okay, he was like talking to his mind, like, okay, I have been practicing. I have found deep levels of concentration. I have been doing extreme yoga. I'm close. He kind of knew, like, I feel like I'm close. I know that that the awakening, this understanding, this release, this nibbana can occur. I have faith that it can occur. And he said, I'm resolved to sit until I awaken. And so this strong resolve or strong determination is sometimes the way it's talked about, strong determination. And we can do that strong determination, apply that virya, because our mind is gonna try to pull us off. Our body is gonna say, like, it's gonna be painful. The foot will fall asleep. The back will ache. All these different things are gonna happen. And the strong determination is, okay, can I just be with this? I'm just going to endure what's happening here for the greater good, for the greater purpose. So he takes the final seat, and then he has this battle with Mara, which we've talked about before, where he confronts basically, kind of like I was saying, he was on the train of thought. He was being attacked by these trains of self, right? Of ego, the greed mind, the kind of wanting, the desire, envisioning having sex and envisioning eating like amazing food, and all the things that he was renouncing were coming up. There was parts of his mind that were saying, yeah, no, dude, you really need to have some apple pie, or, go and sleep with a woman. Like, when was the last time you did that? Go see your wife, or go, whatever. Like there was all of these kind of images and stories coming up in his mind. And he was able to see, just like when he was in abundance and kind of in the kind of hedonistic royalty, that none of it lasted. And all pleasurable experience, he began to see, arises and passes away, and doesn't cause end relief, right? So he, in some ways, he kind of vanquished that part of. He was able to see, okay, so if I feed these fantasizing or kind of greed-like thoughts, then I will create more lust in the mind, more greed in the mind, more addiction to these kind of thoughts and behaviors in the mind. So he renounced that by seeing the wisdom of it. And one of the ways that it's described, I appreciate this, is that the way the story goes, Siddhartha was, in this kind of enthralled with fantasy, lust, wanting, desire, of, foods and sex, basically, right? I mean, food and sex, right? And, maybe there was some drugs there too. Maybe he, drinking wine or, whatever, and kind of entered into his mind. But he began to see the beautiful women that was in his mind, the fantasy getting older, so aging, and then the kind of beauty like leaving, the body dying, the body decaying, right? The flesh kind of rotting off the body. So that was how he worked with the lust in the mind. And then the same thing with the food. It's temporary. You ingest it. It's fuel. It can help you, but also seeing that it doesn't last. There's always a constant need for more, and the indulgence just feeds on itself. And you also began to see, that ultimately doesn't last either. So then the second wave, so that was the first wave, lust. The second wave is all of the people that were mad, his 5 friends that were like, fuck that dude, like he's having a bowl of rice. He got attacked by hatred, by anger, by ill will. He started to think about his father and people who had done him wrong, and the resentment started to come up, right? All of the affliction in his mind. And what did he do? But through this wisdom, began to develop compassion for the thoughts, and loving kindness for those who he was angry at, or resentful, or had ill will towards, right? So and then even towards himself, the regret, the remorse that would come up during this time from his life, from his whole life, So there was loving kindness, and compassion was the antidote to hatred and ill will. So then that was the second passing. Then the third passing, or the third kind of example, is that then doubt came up in the mind, right? Delusion, so that came in the form of an ego attack of and like kind of a self-esteem attack. Like what gives you the right to awaken? Like, why do you think that you're going to be free from suffering? Everyone suffers. That's the way it is. So you should just accept it and stop meditating. This is what he was saying in his mind. And I relate a lot to this. This has happened to me a lot in meditation. Been on long retreats. I was in a monastery in Burma, and I was like, what the fuck am I doing here? Like, why am I wearing this robe? Like, why am I only eating once a day at 11 o'clock in the morning? This is not fun. My mind was like, you should go be on a beach somewhere. And, so I can really relate to the doubt, and, well, all of it, because we all can. Right? This is the struggle. We can all relate to the doubts and the fears and the anger and the things that kind of keep us locked into a addictive kind of small self way of being in the world. And doubt is no different. And so what he reflected on, and there's different parts to the story, but what he reflected on is his good intention. He reflected on the intention to that the reason that he left the palace, the reason that he spent 7 years in these concentrated states and yoga states and extreme asceticism was noble, right? Was worthwhile. And he also began to reflect on generosity, all of the kindness that he had given to others and that had been given to him. And this and that he had this faith, this conviction, and some inspiration, although the inspiration didn't, at the time of Siddhartha, right, there wasn't a Buddha on the planet, which is a key element to that the teachings of a Buddha, an awakened one, was not found. And so this is where, through his own investigation, Siddhartha came to these understandings. So the greed and the hatred and the delusion played out, and it plagued his mind, and yet he stayed in resolve. He stayed seated. He stayed being with and seeing the trains of thought and returning to the platform of awareness again and again and again. And so this is the kind of the final stage of vanquishing Mara, right? Which is often thought of as the small self or the ego. And that Mara, being vanquished, didn't disappear. It wasn't complete, didn't kill him, but just overpowered through wisdom, kindness, and generosity. Overpowered and overpowered these qualities of mind that had been afflicted, that have afflicted him. So this is the awakening. And then last week we kind of left off on this. He was then in for like 8 days. So this happened. He had this awakening experience where he kind of recognized, I don't have the book. I'll read it next time. There's this very famous where he kind of says something like, I see the builder of this house, and I see that the foundation is weak, and I see, and this is all of his constructs, right? All of our constructs that lead us again and again into greed, hatred, and delusion, or what are called the 5 hindrances, right? Agitation and sleepiness and things that are hindering us from seeing the truth in nature. So there's this, I have, shattered the ridge pole that was kind of what was holding up the roof to this construct, kind of like, I don't know if you guys even remember the Matrix, but kind of like when Nemo and is it Nemo? No, Neo. When Neo kind of breaks through the understanding of how to, be active and take control of his own life within the Matrix, right? This is actually, I don't know if you know this or not, but the Matrix, the original Matrix, is the hero's journey all the way through, like to the very end. Was it Anderson? No, it's who's the one, the nemesis. I can't remember his name right now, but he was, the one agent, the one agent. Yeah, I can't remember his name because he would say Mr. Anderson, but I can't remember what his name was. But anyway, he was basically Mara. No, Mr. Anderson was Neo, right?
Smith, I think.
Agent, maybe it's Agent Smith, yeah. But anyway, I think you're right. I think it is Smith. And so that whole unfolding is literally go and watch it again. It's literally the calling, the departure, the struggle, the awakening, and the return. And it's all with lots of guns and martial arts, but it's all really about how we're going through this whole process of waking up and seeing the truth, which isn't always pleasant, right? And that's part of it, is that we're not being deluded by, which happens all the time. That's part of this whole thing, is that we're being constantly kind of tantalized by our Instagram feeds and the ads that they feed us, and this. I was talking with someone today about happiness, and that there's this misunderstanding that we're all given at some point that we should be happy all the time, and we're not, and that's a problem. That's not a problem. That's just reality. And I think what the Buddha recognized is that if I don't feed greed, if I don't feed hatred, if I don't feed the delusion, if I see clearly through the facade of, toxic positivity, we can call it, then I will be calm. There will be more peace, more ease. So this is the kind of the awakening. And then he sat in contemplation. I need to end here. He sat in contemplation, and we're back to the same place that we left last week. So he sat in contemplation, and he was basically like, all right, well, now I've freed my own heart and mind, and I'd like to be able to free others. I'd like to be able to help others, but I don't really know how. Like, this was fucking hard. And this is where he says what this relinquishing of greed, hatred, and delusion goes against the stream. It's against the flow of society. And so we'll stop it there, and we'll pick it up from there. I won't do a recap next week. We'll just move right into his decision to teach. But is there any kind of thoughts or comments before we end? Questions? Maybe not comments. We'll just go with questions. Yeah. Anything that wasn't clear? All right.
Give it to next week.
Open are the doors to the death list. That's right. That's where we're going. So just so you know, yeah, so we'll kind of move on from here next week. Thank you for your time and attention. Those of you online, those of you in the room, please know that this center is run completely on the donation of those who attend. There is I think we're at $20 suggested donation for the center. You can, there's probably something in the chat for those of you at home. And there's a bowl for those of you in the room. There's a QR code. And then also if you want to, I don't charge for teaching. This is something that I do out of the love of the teaching and the practice. There is a reciprocation that is part of the tradition, which is generosity, right? And so if you want to support me and my practice and my teaching, you can do so. I have a Venmo, it's Jason Murphy or No BS Buddhist. You can also follow on YouTube, and there's several of the Dharma talks over the last couple of years have been posted there, so you can kind of keep up. And maybe if you missed the last two groups, or I go a little bit more into depth. So next week I will talk about precepts and addiction, and I'm going to be seeing Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is one of the most renowned kind of scholars. He's coming to LA actually, and let's see if I have that. We'll end in just a second here. Of course, if you need to leave, you need to leave. Where is it? Right here. So Bhikkhu Bodhi, Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, will be this Saturday, May 13th, from 9 a.m. to 10:30 at the Dharma Vijaya, which is in Crenshaw, on Crenshaw Boulevard, Los Angeles. If you want that information and you're in the room, I can give that to you. If you want this information and you're on the Zoom, I don't know that there'll be a Zoom. I don't think there's no link or anything. I think it's a live event. So this is a monastery, a Sri Lankan monastery that is just a couple miles from here. And so if you want to go, then I can send it to you. And if you want to go, I can send it to you. You just have to Instagram me. So Instagram is No BS Buddhist. All right. All right. Let's just, my whole point is that I'll ask him about addiction. Like, was the Buddha, did the Buddha drink and smoke weed? Any goodness that comes from our practice, may this goodness be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings. May we all be free. This is what we call sharing of the merit, the goodness of our practice. Thank you for participating.